Congress is hereby called to order. Let us observe a minute of silent prayer. Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Getzalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Suveri, Senate President Pimentel.
15 lang. With 15 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 32nd session, Tuesday, November 21, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection to the motion to dispense with the reading and consider the same as approved of the journal? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I'd like to acknowledge the guests of Senator Angara and Senator Subiri, the not co-party list representative Sabiñano Canama and Representative Anthony Bravo, the AGA party list representative Rico Heron, together with the 300 co-op leaders from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all the cooperators here present.
Mr. President, before we proceed with the main agenda for today, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Communications, letter from the Office of the President of the Philippines, transmitting to the Senate two original copies of the following Republic Acts, which were signed by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Republic Act number 10953, entitled Dividing Barangay Pampanga in Davao into Barangay Pampanga, Barangay Alfonso Angliongto Senior, and Barangay Vicente Hizon Senior. Republic Act number 10954, entitled Dividing Barangay Magugpo in Tagum, Davao del Norte into Barangay Magugpo Poblacion, Barangay Magugpo East, Barangay Magugpo West, Barangay Magugpo North, and Barangay Magugpo South. Republic Act number 10955, entitled Dividing Barangay Dumalneg in Ilocos Norte into Barangay Calao, Barangay Cabaritan, and Barangay Cuibel. Republic Act number 10956, entitled Creating a Barangay to be known as Barangay Care in Tarlac. Republic Act number 10957, entitled Creating a Barangay to be known as Barangay Liwon in Asipulo, Ifugao. And Republic Act number 10958, entitled Dividing Barangay Kanumay in Valenzuela into Barangay Kanumay West and Barangay Kanumay East.
To the archives.
Letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances. In compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act number 7653, circular letters numbers CL-2017-055, 056, 057, 058, 059, 060, 061, 062, 063, 064, 065, and 066 dated 20, 22, 15, 28, 29 September 2017, 2, 9, 20 October 2017, and 3 November 2017. Circular numbers 974, 975, 976, 977, 978, and 980 dated 29 September 2017, 10/27 October 2017, and 6 November 2017, and memorandum numbers M-2017-030, 031, 032, 033, 034, and 035, dated 2, 4, 11, 13, 20 October 2017, and 6 November 2017.
Referred to the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1592 under Committee Report 164.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Bill, TRAIN, as we call it. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we have already terminated the period of interpellations. So I move that we open the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, we are now into the period for amendments.
Considering that this is a substitute bill, there are no committee amendments, Mr. President, and therefore I move to open the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, so we clarify that we are in the period for individual amendments.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, and after consulting the Senate President, the Minority Leader as well, and the President Pro Tem, the procedure that your Majority Leader would like to pursue would be for us to open the period of individual amendments and call on the sponsor of the measure to introduce his individual amendments. And that is no other than, of course, Senator Sani Angara. Thereafter, we will, if it is very extensive, we will need to have a clean copy. Now, with or without a clean copy, as we will decide later, the procedure that we would like to follow would be for the body to amend the bill and to introduce individual amendments by section. And of course, we will start on page 1. And therefore, we will acknowledge whoever has any amendments per section. And we will start from section 1, of course. With that, Mr. President, I move that we recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Sani Angara, to introduce his individual amendments.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. We have a number of amendments to the committee report. The first, Mr. President, pertains to the income tax for compensation income earners in response to the amendments proposed by the good Senate President, the presiding officer, Senate President Pro Temp, Senator Recto, Senators Gatchalian, Ejercito, and Villanueva, which they've all moved to have, in certain ways, to have the personal exemption increased from 150,000. So in response to that, Mr. President, we are adopting a 3-tier schedule, where on the 3rd year, we move to the full 250,000 exemption, which is that proposed by the department as well as by the House. So without further ado, Mr. President, the first amendment is on page 8. I move that we delete lines 1 to 13, and in lieu thereof, to insert the following schedule, if we could show it on the screen for our members' perusal, Mr. President, and if it's not ready, then we can suspend for a few minutes.
Session is suspended to prepare the screen.
You want to take a look first?
Amended. Okay.
Yeah. Yung ba next na natin? No, I went to, it's pretty actually, because it's a very thin country and very progressive. They also, with their own mining, they make them a lot of money. They're starting to be a tourism.
The head of the USA project is a former user of the Minister of Finance. So I can ask.
Naka-flash na sa kanila.
Atacama Desert, yeah.
Pakisilip, wala pa. Kaya ako nakikita.
I went about 8 to 9. A little dry.
Sa kanila.
Interesting is yung Viña del Mar, Valparaiso.
Kaya pala. Kala ko ready.
Oh, why not? Why not? If I'm going back, puntahan ko na yung
Pero na yata eh.
yung Machu Picchu and maybe Mexico or Galapagos. Yung off the beaten track.
Okay.
What do you mean,
Are we ready, Senator Angara? Is that the correct?
I think some of the members are commenting on the size of the font, Mr. President, and this representation also, they want it shrunk, Mr. President. No, but I think maybe the controller of the screen could zoom in on the right side of the screen, because that is the proposed amendment, Mr.
On the
President.
amendments, because
yes.
we have a
because we have copies anyway.
Yes.
We've been furnished copies of the committee report already. You can zoom in on the right side.
Sige.
And we'll also furnish hard copies to the senators, Mr. President.
We are still suspended anyway, so can you fix it, please?
I-zoom in? Kaya ba? Kaya ba i-zoom in sa right?
Yung amendments lang.
Senator Dick, bigyan niyo ng copy. Unahin niyo. Senator Nancy. Of course. Everyone. Oo. Alam ko maganda pa yung mata mo, Nancy. Kaya hindi kita ito. Nabigyan na. Hindi, okay. Gusto ko rin tapusin sa urgent.
Is that okay? Is that
Mr.
okay?
President, if the members have copies, then I think we can start.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first amendment is on page 8. I move that we delete lines 1 to 13 and in lieu thereof insert the three-tier or three-year schedule that is shown on the screen for the perusal of our members, and copies have also been distributed. Basically, it maintains the 150,000 personal exemption for the first year beginning January 1, 2018. But one amendment is to include the 35% HATAP rate, which will kick in for net taxable income over 8 million, Mr. President. This inclusion of a higher tax rate was also made by some of our members. Then on the second year, 2019, the exemption goes to 200,000, and on the third year in 2020, it goes to the full 250,000, Mr. President. I so move.
Any objection? Yes, Senator Recto is recognized.
Just a clarification, Mr. President. The proposal of the gentleman is that on the year 2020, that is the only time that the exemption will be up to 250,000, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President. And thereafter.
And thereafter.
Yes.
The proposal of the DOF is that on the first year, on January 1, 2018, all those below 250 is exempt. Is that correct?
Yes, for the DOF proposal, it's implementable right away. In the House, they modified it a little bit. They have a 2-tier, and ours is a 3-year acceleration.
Now,
Mr.
my
President.
understanding is that in the House, which is similar to the DOF, that by 2020, those above 250,000, which will have a rate of 20%, will still go down to 15,
Yes, Mr. President.
right?
Yes.
So the statement earlier is not entirely accurate, but I don't fault the chairman for that. Now, what happens, Mr. President, if we accept this amendment, and my proposed amendment later on will be immediately, January 1, 2018, 250 na ang exempted.
We can tackle it at the proper time, Mr. President. Yeah.
Procedurally, is this correct, Mr. President? In effect, my proposal is to accept the DOF proposal. That gives a bigger tax breaks to individuals in the first year of implementation.
We can tackle it when the gentleman's time to make the amendments, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader?
if the, well, it somehow defeats the procedure that we were talking about earlier, but if it will shorten the proceedings, it's okay. But just a small question before I ask the Minority Leader to be recognized, Mr. President. To both gentlemen who are proposing these amendments, when you say 250 or 150 in the first year, whatever, 250,000, you mean, do you mean only those earning below 250,000, or we mean anybody who earns, basta in the first 250,000 niya is not taxable?
It is the latter, Mr. President.
It is the latter. Therefore, for the record, what we are enforcing here would be anybody earning 250,000, the first 250,000 is tax exempt.
That's correct, Mr. President.
All right. May I recognize the
Minority
Minority
Leader,
Leader, Mr. President?
Just on a procedural matter, Mr. President. My understanding is that the chairman, the sponsor, is presenting this as an amendment as of now. And Senator Recto has his own amendment, which differs from the amendment proposed by the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means. If we approve this amendment proposed by the chair of the committee, and later on Senator Recto presents his own amendment, are we reconsidering the approval of the amendment presented by the committee chair?
In effect,
I
yes,
think
Mr.
that procedure is a little bit confusing, Mr. Chairman.
I agree it's confusing, Mr. President, but we can follow the saying that only fools do not change their minds. So we can change our mind later. It has happened before, Mr. President.
Yeah, but
It's actually a concession to the sponsor that we are treating his proposed amendments as if they were committee amendments.
And therefore,
And we are only doing it in the period of individual amendments because this is a substitute bill. But
yeah.
the logic in conceding this, making this concession to the sponsor is that he has gone over all our proposed amendments. Hence, if we give him the first crack in amending the law, we might be able to save time because those who have submitted proposed amendments will see that some of their proposals have been accommodated by the sponsor. That is the idea. So we are giving this concession to the sponsor.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
isn't it a better process, and this is in accordance with parliamentary practice, the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means presents his individual amendment. Senator Recto, who has an amendment on the same section, will now present to the floor an amendment to the Angara amendment. If Angara accepts that, then we vote on the Angara amendment as amended by Senator Recto. And if Senator Angara does not accept the amendment of Senator Recto, then we vote on that, the rest of the amendment. I think that's a better procedure, so that at the end of this session, we will have something definite on how the provision will look like. And that is a proper procedure that we should follow, less confusing. And
Majority
we'll say
Leader.
so.
President,
Majority Leader.
I will concur as long as we continue with Senator Angara amending all
Yes,
the provisions and all the pages he would want to amend. You know,
Yes, we will continue with that. We will. Senator Angara has the floor, but we should for an orderly debate and consistent with the procedure. In this particular case, if there is another member of the chamber who has an amendment, then it is presented as an amendment to the amendment of Senator Angara. That's correct. And then we vote on that.
Okay.
as a matter of fact, it can apply also to any objection.
Yes, yes,
So-
precisely, sir.
With the understanding
Yes.
that the senator proposing the amendment to the amendment, if it is lost, he will not revive it anymore during his during
Yes,
the
yes,
during
sir.
the section by
Yes.
section
Yes.
segment. Yes.
Of course, Mr.
Okay,
President,
that's-
we
that's
will not
the-
entertain such.
If Senator Recto will agree.
yes. You know, procedurally, I think the minority leader is correct. But you know, there are other questions that are raised. For example, if the senator is already in section 5, the chairman of the committee, and I do have amendments, let's say in section
Hindi,
2,
iba naman yun.
anterior amendment, I can do that later on.
Later on, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr.
But
President.
procedurally,
Yes, yes.
having been here for almost 18 years, procedurally, it should be the case that if you have a prior amendment,
Anterior,
an anterior amendment, that should be
correct.
followed. Now, that should be a faster process. But you know, I do not wish to delay the proceeding. My problem is, assuming we adopt this procedure, and I am not objecting, then there is no debate. Meaning to say, every amendment of the chairman with the understand will be accepted, but at the proper time, we can amend it. I think that is what the Senate President is
Pwede
suggesting.
rin yun. Pwede rin yun. Pareho kayong merong punto eh.
Now,
President, with
on
the
the
permission-
merits, one last point, Mr. President. On the merits of this amendment, my problem is not only is the tax exempt lower in the first year, but it will be hard to have an income tax schedule changing every year. It becomes complicated. And precisely the amendments that we are proposing is to simplify the tax code, not to make it complicated, so that the ordinary Juan de la Cruz understands the tax code or what he is obligated to pay. Now, kung every year pabago-bago tayo ng rates, it becomes complicated. That is my point, Mr. President, with regard to the merit of the proposal.
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Halika, dito.
Modified.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Resume.
May we now hear the ruling of the chair on the proposals presented by the minority leader and
We will continue to allow the sponsor to introduce his individual amendments, and those with a different opinion on the matter or a clashing amendment should already stand up and
may
make his proposal as an amendment to the amendment so that the body can now settle the issue once and for all. And then in the afternoon session, when we will go section by section, all the untouched sections are still open for amendment. And even same sections which have been amended in the morning session can still be amended on a different matter.
all right.
So is that clear to all the members?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, so we can continue. And the
therefore,
status now
yes.
is,
Senator Recto is proposing an amendment to
The amendment, yes.
amendment of Senator.
so
Garza.
Senator Recto will have the floor to particularize his proposed amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I know the difficulties of the chairman
Yan decision ni
trying to marry all the proposals from all our colleagues and trying to work it out also with the Department of Finance. So I do not fault the chairman for this, Mr. President. It is a difficult job. Having said that, Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, I would rather have a situation wherein the first 250,000 will be zero tax, Mr. President. Now, having said that, my proposed amendment is also found in the same section, and it is one schedule starting January 2018,
yung nakapost sa kanya.
and thereafter, this will be the schedule, Mr. President, so that you do not have multiple schedules every year, Mr. President, which will become a little more confusing. Now, my amendment is similar to that of the executive position. And therefore, on section
This is the deal, eh?
Section 5, which is the Section 24 of the NIRC as amended, is hereby further amended to read as follows. In the committee report, delete what the chairman wanted deleted, and in lieu thereof, tax schedule effective January 1, 2018, not over 250,000, zero. Over 250 but not over 400,000, 20% of the excess over 250,000. Over 400,000 but not over 800,000, 30,000 plus 25% of the excess over 400,000. Over 800,000 but not over 2 million, 130,000 plus 30% of the excess of over 800,000. Over 2 million but not over 5 million, 490,000 plus 32% of the excess over 2 million. Over 5 million, 1,450,000 plus 35% of the excess over 5 million. That is the amendment, without prejudice to amending other lines at the appropriate time, Mr. President.
A 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Let's go. With the modification.
Are we ready?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
If, with the indulgence of the gentleman from Batangas, our amendment, we're willing to accept his amendment if he can amend it, or if he could modify it for the top rate to be 8 million rather than 5 million, Mr. President. And then we're ready to accept.
Okay. Just one question, Mr. President. There is a request from the chair, based on the initial amendment, that the top rate be 8 million. May I ask the implication on the revenue projections, if at all there will be any? Will there be a revenue implication?
It's less than $1 billion, Mr. President.
When we say less than $1 billion, does that mean that we are further reducing by $1 billion
Yes, Mr. President. Yes.
for those earning above? There's a revenue gain. There's a revenue gain of $1 billion.
Loss, Mr. President.
Loss.
Yes, loss. Yeah. But the original proposal made by this representation, there would be a gain, if that's the question of the gentleman.
No, the point is,
Yeah.
the question is, assuming I were to amend my amendment over 5 million at palitan ko yan ng 8 million at 35%, will there be a revenue gain or loss?
It's a loss, Mr. President.
It's a loss.
It's a loss, yes.
And if we have a loss there, and we're giving, in effect, more money to the people earning in this stock at this level.
That's,
Because it's a loss.
that's true to a certain extent, but this is a highly flexible, I think, income bracket where they can plan things away, Mr. President.
I understand.
By stock options, things like that. So
I understand.
we're trying to balance a lot of things. And the reason why we're setting it at 8 billion or 8 million, Mr. President, is that's more or less what Thailand does as well. So that's the reason why we want to set it. We don't want to set it too low also and discourage high income but talented individuals.
My only problem with
perhaps
that,
locating
I will
here.
accept, Mr. President, my only problem with that is that we're giving away $1 billion pesos to all those earning 5 million and above. In effect, ilan lang yan, how many taxpayers are we talking about? And later on, we will be asked by the Department of Finance to raise consumer taxes by $1 billion pesos to pay for this 1 billion. That is my problem, Mr. President.
We will ensure that it doesn't come from there with your help, Mr. President.
Okay, so at the appropriate time, Mr. President, if I accept the amendment, then we can reduce what the DOF is requesting by at least $1 billion because of this.
It's possible, Mr. President. It's negotiable.
So do I have the assurance of the chairman that we can reduce consumer taxes by at least $1 billion later on if I propose this 8 million amendment?
With the assurance that it will be negotiated, yes, certainly. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I do not wish to prolong this. So therefore, there will be an amendment to my amendment. Can we put that in or modify my amendment?
No, you're making it your own,
Yes,
Director.
that is correct,
Yes.
because that is the proper procedure,
Yes,
Mr.
yes, sir.
President. So could we have it on the board again, please? So over,
I think they're editing it.
yes, modifying my amendment. Thank you for that, Majority Leader. Yeah, the Majority Leader is very strict on the rules, which he should be, Mr. President. Now can we have it on the board?
So wala nang indexation.
So on the line over 2 million, but not
We'll keep the
over 8 million,
Kasi 2025 is only because we moved it to 3 years.
the number should be, ito tawag
Yun
ito,
yan.
510,000.
Yan kasi yung principal sinabi.
Okay, it should be.
Bale, straight to 3 years.
Basic tax
Okay.
pa, hindi pa niya na-compute.
Okay, so let me restate the entire Because you have to make new computations, Mr. President. So the proposed tax schedule, not over 250, zero. Over 250, but not over 400, 20% of the excess over 250. Over 400, but not over 800,000, 30,000 plus 25% of the excess over 400,000. Over 800,000, but not over 2 million, 130,000 plus 30% of the excess over 800,000. Over 2 million, but not over 8 million, 490,000 plus 32% of the excess over 8 million.
Over 2 million.
Over 2 million.
Yes, sir.
Over
8 million.
Over 8 million, 2,410,000 plus 35% of the excess over 8 million.
Okay.
We accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any objection? Can we show the new wording, please, and the new figures? Wala pa ba? Wala. Session suspended.
Alam natin.
Pero accepted na niya, di ba?
Mahirap eh. We'll slow down. Why don't you talk to suspend naman? Our proposal is 2 points. You can enter the floor. Kasi nakasuspend na. What should it be?
Session is resumed. So the motion now is to amend
Okay.
section 5 by deleting lines 1 to 13 on page 8 and replacing it with the recto amendment because it has been accepted by the sponsor. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, just to clarify and to put on record, this is a modified recto amendment.
Yes.
And we put on the record that there was a suggestion from coming from our colleague that my top rate from 5 becomes 8. And I already warned the body, but I'm accepting it
Yes.
because that there's a 1 billion effect. And for as long as it does not increase our target by $1 billion, it's fine with me.
Any objection? Already read, sir. Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next amendment is on page 8, line 14. This is a provision talking about indexation, Mr. President. We replace the word 2021 with 2022. So move, Mr. President. Yes.
Senator Recto?
I apologize, Mr. President, but I do also have an amendment here. But before I propose my amendment, if I may ask the gentleman, the sponsor of the measure, that the idea of this, it is a good idea, let me put it that way, that the idea of the sponsor is to have an indexation every 3 years.
What the committee report says, distinguished colleague, Mr. President, is every 3 years, but upon conferring with the DOF, they prefer every 4 years, and that is the import of this amendment and the succeeding amendment. It's no longer 2025 as it says on the screen because we abandoned that with the acceptance of your amendment. So it should be 2022 because that is the 4th year.
I agree.
After.
That's right.
And we will say every 4 years, Mr. President.
Every 4 years, there will be a recalibration of the...
An indexation upwards, Mr.
indexation
President. They cannot
upward.
index downwards.
Correct, correct. Now, my only problem with this, Mr. President, is that I don't think indexation is a good policy as far as taxation is concerned. And let me point it out. While it is true that the previous administration did not adjust the schedule upwards by inflation today in the Philippines, the previous administration, and this administration proposes a high reduction in income taxes, has nothing to do with inflation. Meaning to say, what we just adopted earlier, the 250,000, and then the top rate of 8 million, when was the last time the tax code was amended? In 1997. On the
Well, these
income
provisions, I think 1997, but we amended it after that for the 13th-month bonus, for
Correct.
for
No,
exempting
I'm just-
minimum wage
yes.
earners, among others.
which I am the principal author of.
Yes.
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 No, my question is, the schedule itself, when was this last adopted? 20 years ago.
The CTRP was adopted in 1997 during the
tax
time of
schedule
President
itself.
Ramos. Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, which we just amended earlier. Okay? If you were to apply inflation from 1997 to 2017, what would that tax schedule we just approved look like? It would be lower than what we approved.
Yes, it would be. That was our, those were the bills we filed in the previous,
Correct.
in the 16th Congress. It was more of an
Correct.
indexation, Mr.
Correct.
President. Yes.
So it would be much lower than we approved.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay? Now, we don't know what our neighbors will be doing. The problem with indexing, you're tied to that formula. So I don't think it is a good policy to do indexation and leave it to the wisdom of Congress to make the adjustments. Anyway, it is 4 years. A term of an administration is 6 years. If at all we were to index, my proposal would be, assuming we need to index, then at least every administration 6 years. Instead of once, not twice in an administration for 3 years, or in this case, 4, Mr. President. Now, if we do this for taxpayers, they could be shortchanged. For example, like I said today, if the schedule, going back to the schedule in 1997, what would it look like today if it were indexed?
If we indexed it today?
Yes.
I think the top rate would probably be, instead of 500,000, it would be something like 1.4 or 1.5 million, Mr. President.
Can you imagine? What would be the bottom rate? 10,000 to 30.
Well, now it's 10,000 to 70,000, I think.
Correct.
So it would, you just index that,
30.
probably times a little bit over 2, double it in it a little bit.
Yeah, which is
like
30,000.
For the 10 would be something like 30,000, yes.
And
For
what
the
did we
gentleman,
approve? An exemption.
250, Mr. President.
9 times more.
That's right. It's very generous. That's why you will be appreciated by the voters, Mr. President.
I think the chairman will be appreciated by the voters with this proper trade measure.
I hope you're right, Mr. President.
We're working toward that end, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. President, if the amendment of the gentleman from Batangas is for a 6-year indexation, we will accept that.
You know, frankly, it doesn't change the picture. My proposal is to delete the indexation and leave it to the wisdom. Para hindi pa bago-bago, and let this be a political issue during elections. And let people campaign on their position on taxes. Let people campaign on their position how to spend the money.
Mr. President, in response, I see the point of the gentleman that there will be no need for indexation in the next few years because we've been very generous. I think that's his point.
That's also
But
what
the indexation is a built-in safeguard for to guard against bracket creep and inflation. Because if there was a built-in indexation, then we wouldn't have to amend the tax code since 1997.
I understand the position,
Yes.
and I welcome that position. I'm just giving an alternative thought, Mr. President, based on experience and based on practice, and based on what I see in many other countries around the world, Mr. President.
If the chairman is willing to move the date of indexation when we begin indexation later, in accordance with what the gentleman from Batangas wishes, and to adopt even a longer schedule. So if he wishes that the next administration would conduct the indexation, that's fine with me. And if he wishes to go higher than 4 years, 6 years, since he mentioned that it should be done in every administration, only once, then that's fine with me also,
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes. The problem also with indexation is that if it's every 3-4 years, there's a revenue impact.
Certainly there is a revenue impact, but there is also an income impact, and it protects the income of the
Correct.
taxpayers.
Which is
Mr.
not
President.
projected in any of our versions here today.
So,
And then later on, you know, once you have all these indexations, later on, consumer taxes will be indexed as well. And that's why philosophically, I am against indexation. That's correct. Yeah, but we're not talking about that now.
we can choose. I think, Mr. President, the Congress has sufficient leeway to choose which taxes it wishes to index. If it wishes to index the estate, the income, then that's fine. But I think what the DOF is requesting is that the indexation not occur at different points in time. So make it easier for the tax administrators. If we decide for 5 years for income, then let's also go for 5 years for income and for estate and other VAT threshold,
And
among
again,
other things, Mr. President.
Based on what we have just done, it had nothing to do with inflation from 1997 to 2007, because the exempt, if you follow inflation, would have been 30,000 lang. We just approved 250. That's 9 times more than inflation. Because things change around the world. I'll give you another example, Mr. President. Let's say vehicles. And later, that's another chapter we'll get into later on. Why cannot you index vehicles? Because technology changes over time. a 1 million car before would not have all those technological advances than a million car today. So I'm just looking at the entire bill. Everything is interrelated, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, and we await the amendment of the gentleman, whatever it is, and
Yes,
we're
so
open
so
to
my amendment,
extending the period.
yes,
Mr.
my
President.
amendment is to delete. In fact, in the later on, I will delete all indexation. That is my proposal. That is where I stand. Yes, that is correct.
So,
Because my fear is there will be indexation on consumer taxes also later on.
Well, this representation is giving the assurance that it is not automatic that we will index. In fact, I don't think there's any indexation for consumer taxes in the committee report, Mr. President. All the indexation is in the taxes which are favorable to the taxpayer. For the record, Mr. President.
Yeah, but again, for the record, speaking from experience, what we just did today, if you use the inflation, the tax exempt, let me repeat, from 10,000 will be 30.
But it
But
would
today,
extend to the
250.
minimum wage earners because we enacted RA 9504. So it's not just 30, Mr. President. It's also those, whatever the minimum wage is,
150 plus 30, 180.
which is already about 140,000.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So, but in this case, it's 250 plus 82. 332. For one taxpayer, times 2 pa yun. Because husband and wife. No, because meron siyang proposal eh. Mine is
so has the recto amendment been
Mr.
stated?
President, the decision has to be made. Lines 14 to 20 is being amended by the sponsor.
Yes.
Now, the amendment of Senator Recto on the same lines between 14 to 20 is to delete the entire paragraph. So, if the sponsor is going to accept that, let's do it now. If not, then let's go on with this amendment and wait for Senator Recto's turn later.
If the sponsor does not accept it, I think we have to vote.
correct.
Yes, yes, of course.
So, has the recto amendment been stated? Or
Yes, mine is just to delete, Mr. President. Yeah.
Okay. So what
Yes,
does the
14 to
sponsor
20.
say to the recto amendment which actually abolishes the indexation as idea for this in this paragraph?
We accept, Mr. President. We accept.
Accepted. So any objection?
Thank you. Thank you to the chairman for being very magnanimous, Mr. President. Thank you.
Any objection from the body?
Malakas po ang Senate President Pro Tem sa akin.
Okay, hearing none, the amendment is approved.
Mr.
A manifestation from Senator Tiberos.
Thank you, Mr. President. So not an objection, but a clarification regarding indexation. I was thinking, how does indexation relate to a taxation system being more or less progressive, which is also a question a principle of taxation that I raised with a good sponsor during interpellation. As I understand it, Mr. President, indexation to inflation is supposed to be a safeguard. So during good times, when inflation is checked, okay with no indexation. But if there is runaway inflation, hindi po kaya magiging totoo din na kailangan ang indexation. I think it's a reasonable question to ask, given that the good Senate President Pro Tempore also said that indexation may be better or worse given that economic conditions change over time. So, but I'd just like to seek the wisdom, Mr. President, or the good sponsor or the good President Pro Tempore. Wouldn't indexation be needed as a safeguard in times of runaway inflation? Just for my enlightenment,
Congress should
Mr.
react.
President.
If there are extraordinary circumstances, that means that it's now the people's representative should be sensitive to the needs of the people and react to the current situation.
And of course, Mr. President, that is still within reach for Congress or the Senate to initiate to do even after we decide on the train bill.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Angara, you can continue, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. You will like the next amendment because it is a Pimentel amendment, Mr. President. This starts on page 8. I propose that we delete lines 21 to 28, up to page 9, lines 1 to 2. This pertains to the self-employed professionals, Mr. President. And in lieu thereof, to insert the following provision. If we could flash it, it's the one on the right side, and if we could zoom in for the benefit of our members, Mr. President. Rate of tax on income of self-employed and/or professionals whose gross sales or gross receipts is at or below the VAT threshold as provided in Section 109. Self-employed individuals and/or professionals shall have the option to avail of an 8% income tax on gross sales or gross receipts in lieu of the graduated income tax rates under subsection 24A2A and the percentage tax under Section 116 of this code. This limits the 8% option in lieu of percentage tax only for those below the VAT threshold, Mr. President. The original proposal of the committee was to make it available to all self-employed and professionals, but I think the revenue impact would have been rather large, around 10 to 11 billion. So we are moving to limit it to those below the VAT threshold, who are the smaller businessmen and entrepreneurs. And the availability of this option will allow them to grow, Mr. President, and we accept your amendment.
Senator Aquino.
Mr. President, before we rule on the proposed amendment, may we ask some clarificatory questions?
Of course,
Yes,
willingly,
yes.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, firstly, the proposal refers to the VAT threshold. May we know what the VAT threshold is?
We amended it already in the committee report. It's 3 million, Mr. President.
3 million. So in effect, Mr. President, from 0 to 3 million in gross sales, the entrepreneur can avail of an 8% tax instead of the personal income tax. Is that correct, Mr. President?
That's correct, instead of the schedular income tax.
Does that
Yes.
include VAT, Mr. President?
I'm sorry?
Does that include VAT? Is this all taxes? Or just
For
the
those
income tax?
under the VAT threshold, they're not required to pay VAT. They're required to pay the percentage tax. So it will be in lieu of the percentage tax, Mr.
Okay.
President.
So in short, Mr. President, ang babayarang buwis ng 0 to 3 million in gross sales ay 8% lamang. This is
Well,
the
that is an
amendment.
option that's given to him. Because I think some businessmen, like those in retail, who have low margins but high expenses, will choose not to avail of that.
Yeah.
But at least we're giving the option to those who have low overhead and would rather have it off the top. It's simpler. It's an option we give to them, Mr. President.
Right. Mr. President, no, I'm in favor of having this tax on gross sales, specifically to make it easier for our countrymen to pay their taxes. No? And as we know, itong sektor pong ito consistently has actually been underpaying their taxes. So this simplification does indeed make it simpler. Although originally, Mr. President, our proposal was actually to, and if you may bear with some slight discussion here, Mr. President, initially we had wanted 0 to 400,000 to actually already be clear that they don't need to pay taxes anymore. No? And this was actually subject, Mr. President, to a previous bill that I had filed in your committee in the 16th Congress. This is the Marginal Income Earner Bill, which would have put at parity our minimum wage earners with their counterpart, self-employed, which we call marginal income earners. No? The idea here, Mr. President, is that if we're exempting already the minimum wage earners at 250,000, then we should also have a counterpart exemption for those self-employed who will be earning roughly the same amount based on gross sales, Mr. President. So as you know, Mr. President, this has been something we had pushed already just so that malinaw na kung maliit lang talaga yung kinikita mo at hindi ka naman compensation earner but you are self-employed or you are an entrepreneur, kaparehas mo na yung mga minimum wage earners, Mr. President.
Well, the exemption of 250,000 is also available to them, so it applies across the board. Whereas before, the exemption of minimum wage earners was only for compensation income earners
Yes.
and could not be availed of. So that's the beauty of the new amendment made by the Senate President, is that all types of workers will be availing of this exemption.
So, Mr. President, for the record, yung ating self-employed and or professionals can still choose to pay based on the based on
Scheduler.
2A.
Yes, the scheduler rates, Mr. President.
Is that correct, Mr. President? Does the scheduler rates now include our self-employed and professionals? Because the original committee report, of course, just mentions compensation income earners. Have we amended Section A to
No,
include?
it's always, even at present while we speak, they've always been subject to the scheduler rates.
Yes, Mr. President, but did we make it clear in Section A that that schedule is for compensation income earners and self-employed professionals? Can I just
Well,
request?
we will, if the gentleman has amendment for that to make it clear, we will accept that. But from this amendment that we just read, it is clear that it will apply to them.
May I ask, no, because we just amended it previously and I don't have a copy, could we flash the new Section A? The one we just approved?
Take a look at paragraph C. That is the one which extends the rates to the self-employed.
No, if I may, Mr. President, can we just flash Section A again? We just approved it, no, but I don't have a copy, so if we could kindly just flash it on the screen, what we had approved.
As approved.
As approved?
The rates,
Yes, the whole Section A.
whole section A.
That is the substance of Section A, but the syntax of Section A, do we have no, because Section A starts with
Yes.
Section A on compensation income earners. Tax schedule effective January 1, 2018, 2019, and 20. So wala na yun, di ba? But the Section A start with on compensation income earners?
That's correct. That's
It
correct.
does, no? So in effect, Mr. President, maybe since we are stating that self-employed individuals and professionals can avail of that, maybe we need to amend.
That's fine. If the gentleman wants to make that amendment, we'll accept it either now or at the proper time.
All right. Mr. President, may I ask for a one minute suspension?
Session suspended. Merong C kaya ng Pilipinas.
He's accepting my amendment, but I
2:30 kasi i-request nila yung mga taga-press. Sige na.
Are we ready?
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, we move to delete on compensation income earners in section page 8, line 1. This is section A, Mr. President, of section 5, letter A, Mr. President. The line, we move to delete the line on compensation income earners.
Accept, Mr. President. Accept. We
With
accept.
the understanding, Mr. President,
Yeah.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
and for the record, Mr. President, we are doing this because of the amendment in section B, which now refers to a subclass of self-employed professionals. We deleted this for the record so that it's clear that those that can avail of the schedular personal income tax or income tax are both compensation income earners and self-employed professionals, Mr. President. So, in fact, Mr. President, this section refers to all those who are paying income taxes, personal income taxes. Section B refers to a subset of self-employed professionals, wherein we are allowing them to pay 8% of gross sales or receipts in lieu of personal income taxes, Mr. President. Then Section C, as the good sponsor will get to, will refer to mixed income earners who are both compensation income earners and self-employed professionals, just to make everything clear for the record,
Yes.
Mr. President. So, Mr. President, thank you, good sponsor, and I apologize for jumping my turn, and later on during my turn, we'll
It's okay,
tackle all
Mr.
of
President,
this.
because you clarify the matter. So, but aren't you going to make the motion to provide the or are you leaving it to the to us to provide the option?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. President. Possibly, Mr. President, just by deleting the phrase compensation income earners and clarifying on the record, maybe that could be enough, Mr. President, to cover even the self-employed and the professionals with the very generous tax bracketing that we had just proposed.
So, in effect, we change the title of Section 2A to read as what?
As simply tax schedule effective January 1, 2018. Because the previous line, Mr. President,
With the permission of the gentleman, Mr. President.
yes,
Yes,
I
go
think
ahead,
we
sir.
already deleted that earlier. This was the amendments that we made earlier.
Yeah, but we went to the body, not to the heading.
No, we did.
No, yes, we are now going to the heading.
No, we did. We did delete it. The motion I had earlier was delete line 1 to 13. In lieu thereof, we already put tax schedule effective January 1, 2018.
Oh, yes.
Eh, wala na yung compensation naman talaga to begin with. Oh. It's in the board.
no. Earlier, Mr. President, we had asked the Secretariat and they had indicated otherwise. If it's already moved and accepted,
Yeah.
then there's no problem.
That was deleted earlier, Mr. President.
So, this will be a section without a heading.
The heading is tax schedule effective January 1, 2018. That is the heading. That will apply now to compensation income earners and self-employed and professionals.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you for the clarification, Mr.
We will
President.
have time anyway to improve the styling of the bill. So is that clear, Mr. Sponsor? That's clear?
It's clear, Mr.
Clear to
President.
the body? Okay. Shall we continue, Majority Leader?
Yes. Just to clarify on the amendment of Senator Angara on his paragraph B, because the intention is to give the self-employed, the professionals, the option. Either you follow the schedule or the 8%. Is that correct? It's an
That's
option.
correct, Mr. President.
Okay. And could we have it in the board, the language that he proposed?
Isn't it only for those below that VAT threshold?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Option, yes.
Mr. President,
Yes,
may
yes.
I'd like to, because of my consultations with Senator Recto and Senator Aquino, I'd like to change the language of your amendment
Correct.
to make it If I may read it again, if I may be allowed
Yes.
by the gentleman on the
Yes,
floor
please.
to read it again.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
So,
Tanggalin yung 2A.
subsection B, rate of tax of income of self-employed and or professionals whose gross sales or gross receipts is at or below the VAT threshold as provided in section 109, period dash, self-employed individuals and or professionals shall have the option to avail of an 8% income tax on gross sales or gross receipts in lieu of the graduated income tax rates under section 24A2A and the percentage tax under section 116 of this code, and I will add the phrase or the rates provided under section 24 parenthesis 2 parenthesis A. To make it clear, those are the two options of the of this special subclass below the VAT threshold, Mr. President.
Just a question. Given the VAT threshold, we're not talking about that. It's 3 million below. 2A refers to what?
2A is the schedule that you just amended, Mr.
Correct.
President. Yeah.
So are we, yeah, so here, in lieu thereof, right? Under subsections, have the option to avail of an 8% in lieu of the graduated income tax rates in, correct, and the percentage tax. What was the other?
The phrase we want to add, and maybe someone can type it in, who is in charge of the the keyboard. It disappeared. So at least for the benefit of the members, they can see the amendment. So we would say, after the word code, we would put or the rates provided under section 24, parenthesis 2, parenthesis 8. That's the scheduler. That's the scheduler that you amended earlier.
Yeah, I think it should be 24A2.
I correct myself, Mr. President. It should be A to A. 24, parenthesis A, parenthesis 2, parenthesis A.
Wala na yung A.
Editorial inquiry, Mr. President.
Period. 24A2, period. Diba?
Mr. President.
And the percentage
but-
tax
but-
under
but-
section
Majority
24.
Leader. Yes, sir.
Period. Period. So if I may, Mr. President, to in lieu of the graduated income tax rates under section 24A2 and the percentage tax under section 116 of this code, period.
A2.
My staff is telling me it should be A to A, Mr. President, because A refers to the
We
schedule.
already deleted the A.
So wala nang A.
Wala na yung A, di ba?
But we have a B.
Subsection 24.
Section, yeah.
So maybe we should keep the A, Mr. President, because if you have a B, you should have an A.
Then you have A, effective tax rates. Pwede, A, effective tax rates.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So,
So, editorial.
so maybe we can ask the body if they approve of the changes made by the senator from Batangas and this representation, Mr. President.
Clarification, Mr. President,
Go ahead,
on
sir.
the editing. When you pertain to subsection 24, subsection 24, ano, what is the A? And what is 2? And what is A?
The first A, Mr. President,
Oh.
of the tax code says rates of income tax on individual citizen and individual resident alien of the Philippines. The 2 says, the heading of 2, parenthesis 2, after the A, is rates of tax on taxable income of individuals.
Okay.
And then the A, well, it used to be compensation income earners. It still is in the tax code, but it was removed by Senator Recto, Mr. President. But I'm proposing that we still include the A because the reference is to make it clear that we are referring to the schedular income tax rates which were proposed earlier, Mr. President.
A. So, okay. Because there is a B and there is a C under section 24A2. That's why
Schedule effect.
we need to have an A to maintain the orderly presentation of the concept. So,
So, in effect, what the gentleman is
A
saying,
heading,
which
yeah.
I have no objection, in the previously approved schedule effective January 1, 2018, you have an A in the beginning.
Yes.
That's basically
Okay.
it.
Yes.
Can I propose a wording after the A to constitute the heading for? So can we use rates of tax on income of individuals? Is that a compromise?
That's acceptable, Mr. President.
But I think that's the heading already in,
There is already a heading
that's already the heading in section 24,
A2.
A2.
A2,
Yes,
that's
it says
two
rates of
already.
tax on taxable income of individuals.
Heading na yan, eh.
Oh. So therefore,
Just the A na lang.
We are just in search of a heading.
no, why don't you replace B with A? Relator, Mr. President. C becomes B.
Will be one section later. I assure you, will be one section later.
So I think it's time for a break, Majority Leader, because our
We yield
colleagues.
to the body, Mr. President, but we're also prepared to work through because we
Yes.
have progressed so much.
Let us just finish this particular amendment.
Mr. President, just one final point, just a clarification on the merit of the proposal. I have no objection to the proposal, but I just wanted to find out from the sponsor, and we're taking so much time on this issue, on the choice of 8%. Today, even if you are not, whether votable or not votable, many professionals use the optional standard deduction. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President.
So we're just making so many choices for the taxpayers and making the tax code again a little more complicated, right? Let me explain, Mr. President. So today, it's either you pay the schedule, everyone pays the schedule, income tax schedule. If you're above the VAT threshold, of course you pay the VAT. Below the VAT 3 million, there's no VAT. Then everyone has the option for optional standard deduction. Is that correct?
Not the compensation income, only the self-employed, Mr. President.
Self-employed.
Yes.
Correct. And professionals.
Yes.
And we're discussing here self-employed and
Yes,
professionals.
Mr. President. Yes.
That's right?
That's right.
Okay. So in effect, today, a 40% deduction sa optional standard has an effect of roughly 18% gross.
Yeah, tama? Yes, Mr. President. Yes.
Okay? We are reducing that to 8%.
It's an option, Mr. President.
Correct. But, okay, so marami ng options.
The reason for providing the option, Mr. President, is because the collection is very low from this, as acknowledged by the previous administration when they tried to zero in on the professionals, and they came up with all these ads of teachers paying more than the doctors,
Correct.
accountants, etc. So it's
Yeah.
largely voluntary compliance
But
for
we're
this
only
sector.
talking
Yeah.
about the professionals below the VAT threshold in this.
Yes, because they're smaller, so we want to give them that
Correct.
option to
That's
enable them to grow, Mr. President.
Yeah, 8%,
Yes.
right? Okay, so all I'm saying is that I have no objection to this. All I'm saying is that there are many, many rates now. We're adding another rate in the tax code.
Yes, Mr. President, in the hope of having a better compliance and a better collection.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then ito, option to, it's either he chooses a schedule, because at the appropriate time, this is my dilemma. At the appropriate time, I will make an amendment also on the percentage tax.
Yes, on the rate. Okay.
Kasi may percentage tax na 3% na nakalagay dito eh.
Yes.
Okay? Today, if you're not within the VAT threshold, there's a 3% percentage tax.
That's correct.
Okay? Many people don't know that. Only a few. In fact, halos wala silang collection on the percentage, on the 3%. At the appropriate time, I would like to make an amendment to take away the 3%. So, and that helps your MSMEs, Mr. President. In fact, many of the discussions in ASEAN had to do with MSMEs. So today, the small people will pay the schedular plus the 3%. Now, I don't mind having the 8% option. Tanggalin na natin yung 3%. It just makes the tax code a little more complicated eh. and then we will have amendments later on that the form should only be 2 pages. The idea is to simplify, because today it's 11. So
our understanding is if later on you will propose this amendment concerning the percentage tax.
Correct.
And it gets approved by the body.
Correct.
Then please be conscious of the previously approved
Yeah. So if
sections which will be
yes.
affected.
Yes,
by
since
that
I have no
change.
problem with the 8%, and I'm amenable, for as long as it does not jeopardize my amendment later on with regard to the 3% tax, the percentage tax of 3%.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, but if you succeed, then just point to us what sections would be affected.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
So what is the status now, Majority Leader? Are we?
Yes, can we have the final wording on B? On letter B, if it is B, or we are
Is that the one?
lettering it to A?
No, we are retaining A by just introducing.
The one on the screen is the correct wording, Mr. President, dear Majority
no,
Leader.
So the one on the screen.
All right, so
So-
this is the correct wording of B. A is retained as titled by the Senate President.
No, it's just we will just put an A there. And then,
Just a slight correction, Mr. President, with the indulgence of the members. On the last line, can we put subsection to be consistent with the earlier wording?
Okay.
Just to be consistent.
So that is now the pending amendment.
That is the
Mr.
pending amendment
Sponsor.
before the floor, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Just,
Okay, upon the request of Senator Recto, session is suspended. Majority Leader, the set members have already left, so we have to.
hello. Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
President.
Senator Recto still has some apprehensions regarding the wording, so I think
Session
we
is
should,
resumed.
if we could approve it subject to style and maybe let our parliamentary, without changing the essence of the provision, if they can come up with a better wording later on, but that is the provision as it stands now, Mr. President.
So, is there any objection to approve this subject to style? Hearing none, proposed amendment is approved subject to style.
Thank you. Mr. President, let's proceed with Senator Angara. There might be a few more amendments that will not be controversial. So,
Sponsor, Mr.
before we
Sponsor.
go into a break.
Mr. President, our fifth amendment is still on the self-employed professionals on page 9, line 16 to 28, to delete the entire paragraph since we are only allowing the 8% option for those below the VAT threshold. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, on page, we're now going to the tax on interest income on FCDUs or foreign currency deposits. This is an agreement with the DOF. They prefer a 12% rate. So page 10, lines 12 and 16. To delete the brackets before the word provided and after the word income respectively, Mr. President. delete the brackets before the word provided and after the word income.
So, in effect, retaining them, yes?
Yes, Mr. President.
That's the effect, okay.
So move.
Any objection, Director?
Next, Mr. President, on the same page.
Senator Recto.
Ano bang recto amendment for SB?
So, ang inintroduce. So, naging isa lang. Session suspended. Sessions resumed. Senator Recto has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Just a clarification, because this is a very important topic, Mr. President. We're talking about foreign currency deposit units. Is that correct, Mr.? We're
Correct, Mr.
amending
President, that's correct.
the tax rate on deposits on FCDUs. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President.
And today, the current situation is the tax is 7.5%.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And your committee report was 20%.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And now we are saying it will be
We're moving towards 12%, Mr. President.
12%.
But I think you wanted to move 15. That's also acceptable to this representation, Mr. President.
Okay. No, the first question is, okay, this is not found, this is not, I support the gentleman, huh? I just wanted to put on record. This is not found in the DOF proposal.
It is in the DOF package 4, which is still undergoing
Yes, sir.
some...
It is not found in the DOF proposal package 1. Train.
That's correct, Mr. President.
This is not found in the House version.
That's correct, Mr.
That's
President.
correct, okay? And this type of income is referred to as passive income.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, so similar to peso deposits
Which are taxed at 20%, yes, Mr.
at
President.
20%.
Yes.
And that's why I understand what the gentleman did. Bring from 7.5 to 20%.
Mahirap yung
equalize.
madidihado yung peso account, Mr. President.
Oh, to equalize.
Opo.
Right?
Opo.
Now, what is the purpose of this now? Kung ito gagawin natin 12, will you have a proposal that the 20 will go down to 12?
I think later on we can make that proposal, but it's not in the current committee report, Mr. President, because it will be slightly revenue eroding.
Correct. So your proposal is just to tax FCDU
Yes, Mr. President.
from 7.5 to 12.
To 12, yes. We're about to make that amendment replacing 7.5 with
And
12.
not to touch the peso. Leave
Not
it at
for the
20.
moment, Mr. President. Yes.
Okay. But you reduced it from 20.
We did, Mr. President, at the request of the DOF.
And they wanted it at 12.
Yes.
And how much would be generated?
2B? At 12? What's the difference?
Generated from 7.5 to 12.
To 12.
Okay. And then how much would be lost from 20 to 12?
Kahit hindi na. Oh, pero
Wala pa yung
kasama
20.
yun eh.
Mr. President, to place on record in response to Senator Recto's questions, moving from 7.5 to 12% yields you a billion, and moving from 7.5 to 15, which I understand is among his amendments, would yield you 1.3. That's why this representation is open to either 12 or 15.
Okay. And FCDU is what? 1/3 of all deposits?
It's around a quarter, Mr. President.
And what is the total of all deposits?
Peso total.
Total lahat, peso and dollars lahat.
Peso. In pesos. They say, the DOF is saying that they collect about 15 billion a year from interest income on both peso and dollars. FCDU rather.
And FCD is 1/3 of that.
A quarter, Mr. President.
A quarter.
Yes.
Okay. Now, at the appropriate time, ang FCDU ba, at the end of 5 years, does it become zero or still 7.5%?
No, it does not. It's not subject to the special regime for long-term interest.
Unlike the peso
Unlike
deposits.
pesos, yes.
Okay. Okay. So, minute suspension, Mr. President. Just to confirm with the chairman, kung 12 or 15.
Session suspended. 20 na. Bakit kasi 50?
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
After the discussion, may we now hear the proposed amendment, Mr. President?
Yes, my proposal, since we're moving the FCDU from 7.5 to 12, and understanding that later on we will be moving other rates to 15, for simplicity, Mr. President, and since we got the nod of the DOF, that they are willing, if it is a choice between 12 and 15, they are willing to adopt a 15%. So my amendment is that
Just
we
for the
have 15%.
We accept, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President,
Yes,
let us restate first the amendment of Senator Angara. The first proposal was to remove the brackets. Have we already approved it?
Yes, that is untouched. That's untouched by Senator Recto's proposal. So that has already been carried, and
Yeah.
now this is a separate amendment, but on the same line, Mr. President, Majority Leader.
12%.
Not yet carried, but
No, no,
I wanted to-
I don't remember it being approved, Mr. President. So let's
But
approve
perhaps
first.
before we tackle Senator Recto's, we could,
Yeah.
since it's
Remove
not
the
related.
remove the bracket amendment first,
Yeah.
Mr.
as
President.
correctly pointed out by the Majority Leader, there were actually two amendments in one motion. So we will process it one by one. So on the amendment to delete the brackets, thereby restoring the said phrase from from provided, however, up to interest income. Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved. Now, on the second amendment, which is to change
7.5 to 15, Mr.
the
President.
rate of 7.5% to
15,
rate of 15%. Is there any objection?
in words and numbers.
Yes, in words and numbers. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. The amendment is approved. 15 na-
Next amendment, Mr. President, is pertains to the tax on dividends. This is the Villar amendment. On page 10, lines 27 to 32, up to page 11, lines 1 to 11 to delete the entire paragraph 2 on cash and or property dividends. So move.
Just a deletion.
Mr. President,
Simple deletion, Mr. President.
Any, Senator Recto?
Mr. President, may I know from the gentleman how much are we collecting from cash and property dividends?
It's a little over 2 billion, Mr. President.
And we are collecting this from? We're exempting cash and property dividends?
No, we're no longer exempting them.
Yes. Yeah, because you're deleting it. Ibig sabihin, wala nang cash and or property dividends. These are dividends from publicly listed companies.
That's correct. That's also my understanding.
Okay.
If you delete it, there will be no more final tax of 20%.
1 minute suspension, Mr.
Session
President.
suspended. Tama, di ba? Tama ba?
Status quo. Status quo, pero yung linagay nila sa...
Yan problema.
What are we deleting?
Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
May I suggest that we tackle this particular amendment later, Mr. President, because the minority leader, before he left, and we authorized them to leave,
Yes.
all members of the Senate Electoral Tribunal,
Yes.
to be back here at 2:30. We gave them the authority to leave. Well, he pointed out to me that he would like to place a query to this particular amendment,
Okay.
the removal of the 20% cash or property dividend. So may we skip this if there are 2 or 3 more other amendments that are not so controversial? If Senator Angara will not mind, because I don't
No
think
objection,
we will
Mr.
be
President.
finished before we break.
No objection, Majority Leader.
It is best that Senator Villar and Senator Drilon are here when we tackle this particular amendment.
No objection to defer it,
So,
Mr. President.
Senator Angara can proceed.
Yes, may we withdraw the...
Yes.
We withdraw,
the
Mr.
motion.
President.
So
Thank you.
deemed withdrawn. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Mr. President, the next amendment is on page 11. This is the tax on capital gains. On page 11, line 14, to delete the words and figure 20% and replace with 15%, Mr. President. I so move.
Any objection? Anong line? 14, okay. Any objection? Hearing none? Approved.
Next amendment is on page 12, Mr. President. This refers to RHQs, ROHQs, OBUs, or petroleum service contractors and subcontractors. This is the Aquino amendment, which we are accepting, Mr. President, and the gentleman is in the hall. On page 12, we delete lines 1 to 10, or the entire paragraph F, and in lieu thereof, insert the following language. F, the preferential tax treatment provided in subsection C, D, and E of this section shall not be applicable to regional headquarters, RHQs, regional operating headquarters, ROHQs, offshore banking units, OBUs, or petroleum service contractors and subcontractors registering with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, after January 1, 2018. Provided, however, that existing RHQs, ROHQs, OBUs, or petroleum service contractors and subcontractors presently availing of preferential tax rates for qualified employees shall continue to be entitled to avail of the preferential tax rate for present and future qualified employees. So moved, Mr. President.
So, you insert existing, huh?
Yes.
That existing RHQs, is that what you said, Mrs. Sponsor? Yes?
Yes, Mr. President, because we are closing the window going forward. We are closing the preferential tax treatment going forward, but we are allowing those who are enjoying it to still enjoy it because, as a matter of fairness, these people came and invested when the Philippines was a less than attractive investment destination. So that is the compromise reached.
Okay. Any
Mr. President.
objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, next is the tax on corporation, also on page 12. This is a recto amendment. On page 12, line 11, before section 7, parenthesis, amending section 31, bracket, taxable income defined, bracket, close bracket of the NIRC, as amended, parenthesis, to insert new sections which shall read as follows, and as seen on the screen, section 7, section 27 of the NIRC as amended is hereby further amended to read as follows. Section 27, rates of income tax on domestic corporations. A, in general, moving down to D, rates of tax on certain passive incomes. 1, interest from deposits and yield or any other monetary benefit from deposit substitutes and from trust funds and similar arrangements and royalties. A final tax at the rate of 20% is hereby imposed upon the amount of interest on currency bank deposit and yield or any other monetary benefit from deposit substitutes and from trust funds and similar arrangements received by domestic corporations and royalties derived from sources within the Philippines, provided, however, that interest income derived by a domestic corporation from a depository bank under the expanded foreign currency deposit system shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 12%. 15%. I correct myself, Mr. President. The original amendment was 12, but we've agreed to make it 15 of such interest income. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Excuse me, hearing none, approved.
The next amendment.
Yeah, just a clarification.
Yes.
Am I correct that we're talking about section 7 of the committee report?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President.
And that is paragraph?
Section 7, referring to section 27 of the tax code, paragraph D1.
Okay. So, just to clarify, Mr. President, that since it is in that section, I do have amendments for domestic corporations with regard to giving tax breaks to MSMEs. But since the gentleman did not mention that yet, at the appropriate
Yes.
time, that's our procedure, is that correct?
That's clear,
Mr. President?
yes.
Yes, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentleman from Batangas.
Next.
So, Majority Leader, was that carried?
Yes, it was already.
Thank you. The next amendment refers to the next section, also the same section 7, but referring to section 27 of the tax code and number 2, which refers to capital gains from the sale of shares of stock not traded on the stock exchange, to replace the schedule provided below, which refers to not over 100,000, 5%, amount in excess of 100,000, 10%, to replace that with the 15% that we discussed earlier for individuals. So move, Mr. President.
But what is the wording, Mr.
Well,
Sponsor?
let me read it for the record, Mr. President. Number 2, capital gains from the sale of shares of stock not traded in the stock exchange. A final tax at the rate of 15% in words and figures shall be imposed on net capital gains realized during the taxable year from the sale, exchange, or other disposition of shares of stock in a domestic corporation, except shares sold or disposed of through the stock exchange. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, next amendment is for Section 8, Section 28, which refers to Section 28 of the NIRC. Anong page daw? Anong page?
Page.
Page. What page of the committee report? Oh nga, but to be inserted on what page? It is a new section, Mr. President. We want to locate the precise,
Yeah.
ano. Between lines 16 and 17 of
Page 12.
page 12 of the committee report is to insert a section 28, rates of income tax on foreign corporations, tax on resident foreign corporations, section 7 of section 28 of the tax code with the heading tax on certain incomes received by resident foreign corporation, subsection A, interest from deposits and yield or any other monetary benefit from deposit substitutes and from trust funds and similar arrangements and royalties. A final tax at the rate of 20% is hereby imposed upon the amount of interest on currency bank deposit and yield or any other monetary benefit from deposit substitutes and from trust funds and similar arrangements received by resident foreign corporations and royalties derived from sources within the Philippines, provided, however, that interest income derived by a resident foreign corporation from a depository bank under the expanded foreign currency deposit system shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 15%
15.
of such interest income. So move, Mr. President.
Mr. President, is this being inserted between Section 7 and Section 8 of the committee report?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, specifically on page 12 between the lines
Yes.
16 and 17.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Shall we do the renumbering later, Mr. President, or do it now?
I think we can do it later. Majority
All
leader,
right,
that's all right.
all right. All right.
Mr. President, the next amendment pertains to letter C, capital gains from the sales of shares of stock not traded on the stock exchange. It shall read as follows: a final tax at the rate of 15% shall be imposed on net capital gains realized during the taxable year from the sale, exchange, or other disposition of shares of stock in a domestic corporation except shares sold or disposed of through the stock exchange.
Period.
So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Still the same section, Mr. President. Subsection B, tax on non-resident foreign corporation. 1 in general, and forwarding to number 5, which pertains with the heading tax on certain incomes received by a non-resident foreign corporation. Capital gains from the sale of shares of stock not traded in the stock exchange. A final tax at the rate of 15% shall be imposed on net capital gains realized during the taxable year from the sale, exchange, or other disposition of shares of stock in a domestic corporation except shares sold or disposed of through the stock exchange. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next amendment, Mr. President, is the tax on fringe benefits. Again, this is a Pimentel amendment on page 12, line 17, before Section 8, which amends Section 34, deductions from gross income, to insert a new section which shall read as follows, Mr. President. Section 9, period. Section 33 of the NIRC, as amended, is hereby further amended to read as follows. Section 33, special treatment of fringe benefit. A, imposition of tax. A final tax of 35% effective January 1, 2018 is hereby imposed on the grossed up monetary value of fringe benefit furnished or granted to the employee, except rank and file employees as defined therein by the employer, whether an individual or a corporation, unless the fringe benefit is required by the nature of or necessary to the trade, business, or profession of the employer, or when the fringe benefit is for the convenience or advantage of the employer. The tax herein imposed is payable by the employer, which tax shall be paid in the same manner as provided for under Section 57A of this code. The grossed up monetary value of the fringe benefit shall be determined by dividing the actual monetary value of the fringe benefit by 65% effective January 1, 2018, and thereafter, provided, however, that fringe benefit furnished to employees and taxable under subsections B of Section 25 shall be taxed at the applicable rate imposed thereat, provided further that the grossed up monetary value of the fringe benefit shall be determined by dividing the actual monetary value of the fringe benefit by the difference between 100% and the applicable rate of income tax under subsection B of Section 25. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is that refers to the deductions from gross income. Okay. So, where, go to what? Number at? Anong number na tayo? The next amendment, Mr. President, is on individual returns. Again, this is an amendment proposed by the presiding officer on page 15 to delete lines 8 to 18 or the entire section 10, which amends section 51, individual returns of the NIRC as amended. So moved, Mr. President.
Simple deletion.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next amendment pertains to the estate tax and particularly the family farm, Mr. President.
Senator
I'll
Recto.
try to follow the several versions, Mr. President. And what was discussed earlier, we're deleting individual returns.
Page 15, lines 8 to 18. Is that correct?
we are deleting a section 51 entitled individual return?
The way I understand it, Mr. President, is that you're deleting Section 10 of the committee report.
Okay, got it.
We're not changing
Yes.
Section 51 of the...
We're only deleting it from the bill, Mr. President, not from the
Got
tax
it.
code.
Correct.
Meaning the deletion of the provision that we just made means that the status quo will remain.
Yes. Now, since there is a... Why are we deleting this provision, Mr. President?
That is a proposal of the Senate President, Mr. President.
Yeah, but what was the purpose of the amendment to begin with in the committee report?
We wanted, the DOF wanted to have those individuals who are not required to file a return, still file a return. I think for database and informational purposes.
That's the problem, Mr. President. And I do have amendments in this section.
Well, if you want, we can keep it.
Na halimbawa, if you are a farmer and your income is below 250,000, you are requiring him to file a return? The DOF wants him to file a return?
I think that was their idea, something like that.
I think that is a stupid idea, Mr. President. So in effect, you want 50 million people to file a return. Or anyone who has income, right?
That's why we'll welcome any amendment from, for us this is a minor point, Mr. President.
That's correct.
yeah.
It is a major point because if they want these people to file returns when they have no income, mas magastos pa yung compliance than wala ngang income. You ask them to spend more pa.
We see the point of the gentleman.
Diba? Okay. Now, and that's why I think we should not take away this portion in the committee report, which is a good portion, made by the chairman of the committee. On line 19, an individual whose net taxable income is subject to 0%. In effect, does not have to file a return, right? Yeah. So it was correct. The committee report was correct. Now,
We welcome any idea of the gentleman.
Yes.
If he wants to
so
maintain
I
it, then
support the
we
position
will
of the
withdraw our
chairman.
amendment
Yes,
if he wishes. Yeah.
I support the chairman in this, in the committee report in this section. Now, in addition to that, I do have an amendment on paragraph 5, right?
Paragraph 5 of
Item
what?
5.
Huh?
Oh, item 5. Yeah, this is not in the committee report, and that's why under item 5 of section 51, individual return, these are important amendments, Mr. President. The 2-page income tax return shall only contain the following information.
Well, perhaps we can do that during the time of Senator Recto, Mr. President.
No, the problem is, Majority Leader, is that they are deleting it. I'm against deleting it. Yes.
If we should suspend, I will explain because I think there is some miscommunication here.
Okay.
Because
All right.
the spirit
In that
of my
case-
amendment is actually not to require.
Correct.
Yes, not to require.
But it appears that you're
Yes.
asking them to
So-
require.
If we can go over the basic documents.
Yeah, so in that case, Mr. President, because of the time constraints, we're glad that it was brought out and to be able to give us time to discuss it properly and to give the employees time to have a break. I will move to suspend the session until 2:30 this afternoon, Mr. President, when all of the members of the Senate are already here and present.
Any objection? Hearing none, session is suspended until 2:30 this afternoon.
Mr. President, just a question about the clean copy. Do we want to print a clean copy or it's too early?
Magulo.
Do we print a clean copy? Muna.
Wag muna. Wag, gugulo. Gagalaw eh.
All right.
Section 8, there will be 2 Section 8s. Kasi wala. Section.